Know that I support Read 3 as an independent standalone test. Another item is I think we must address the remediation crisis in our schools. Therefore, I support extending I-STEP from 8th grade to 10th grade. This will allow us to continue to measure student progress and growth in high school. It'll be an important first step in identifying students that require remediation so that they can receive additional support in high school. A diploma from our high school should signal that our graduates are ready for career or college. Another item is finally, I understand that there's some discussion about the merits of either what's called a fixed form versus an adaptive test as we redesign I-STEP for the 2015-2016 academic year. Well, I want to leave technical conversations to the staff experts at DOE and our Office for Education and Career Innovation. Here are a few broad thoughts. Number one, I-STEP is a fixed form test, and it's been useful and recognized as a tool for assessing our students for some time in this state. To my knowledge, no state has moved to an adaptive test as the foundation of a statewide accountability structure. Therefore, we should proceed with caution in terms of analyzing this option for Indiana schools and students. I would say very sincerely, and informed by conversations that I've had with leaders around this table, that we're asking a lot of our teachers over the next 2 years in regards to rollout of our new standards, our revised I-STEP this upcoming year. Therefore, I think we should make every effort to maintain as much consistency as we possibly can in redesigning I-STEP for the 2015-2016 academic year. Those are the principles that I bring into that conversation, and I hope that they can inform our discussions and deliberations going forward. With that, I'll now yield to my co-chair, the superintendent of public instruction, for such comments as she might deem appropriate, as well as to introduce our two next agenda items.
Thank you. First of all, I want to make sure that everybody understands the department's commitment to the waiver as well. And so we are working diligently to be sure that that is submitted by June 30th, and we have that well under control. We have been having good, robust conversation regarding several items within the waiver concerning the topic of growth and assessment to inform our accountability system. So I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. I am going to be committed to making sure there's a smooth transition of standards and to assessments, and that educators and students get the support that they need to be able to have a smooth transition for that effect. Regarding reading, regarding assessment, our conversation today, I think Governor Pence outlined several key areas that you're going to hear about today. You will hear me towards the end of our work ask for an amendment. I have one item that I feel very strongly about in the presentation that we're going to have, and that is that I-STEP itself. When we spend millions of dollars on an assessment, we should at least be entitled to getting separate reading information. Reading is a very important aspect of determining success, and to spend millions of dollars on an I-STEP test that gives us what we call language arts information rather than a separate reading score is something that I don't want to see happen. It's time that we actually measure reading within our assessment, and so I will propose a very simple amendment that you will actually see in this presentation today. Along with that, I want to extend that measuring reading on the I-STEP test is something that is so valuable that we need to have that kind of data follow the child from place to place. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit more when I actually do my amendment to the resolution that you have before you. So with that, I think we're ready for the presentations that we are about to do. The first one is the resolution to replace I-STAR assessment. This is really a U.S. Department mandate that we have college and career-ready assessments for students of special needs. And so Michelle, I think that you are Michelle Walker from the Department, Director of Assessment, is going to begin the presentation.
Thank you. Governor Pence, Superintendent Ritz, and members of the Roundtable, I'm glad to share with you some information about our alternate assessment. The PowerPoint is up here, and I don't have the clicker, but if someone's going to drive for me. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Wanted to give you just a little bit of background about ISTAR. ISTAR is certainly the assessment for our alternate students. Those are students with most significant cognitive disabilities. And we do assess ISTAR in all the same content areas that we do for ISTEP. So English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. As you well know, English language arts, mathematics, and science are required as part of NCLB. And according to Indiana, we also add social studies, which I'll get to in just a moment. So we do administer ISTAR in grades 3 through 8 for English language arts and mathematics. And because the requirement for science is once within some grade spans. So for example, the grade span of elementary, which is grades 3 through 5, middle school is the 6 through 8 grade band, and high school is 10 through 12. So for ISTAR, we do assess very similarly to ISTEP. So we use grades 4, 6, and 10 for science. Indiana does require social studies assessment, and so we have grades 5 and 7, just like ISTEP, for the ISTAR assessment as well. Obviously, our focus is on college and career readiness and measuring our new college and career ready standards, and that goes for our alternate assessment as well. Part of our flexibility waiver, as the superintendent has already indicated, does include our being a part of developing an assessment, which I'll get to in just a moment, that really clearly outlines what students need to know and be able to do in terms of college and career readiness. We already know that we're expected to have an assessment by the spring of 15 for all students that measures our new standards in terms of college and career ready. And obviously those standards were adopted by the state board just recently on April 28th. So to assess those new standards, this is a journey that actually began in the spring of 2011. Indiana educators have been very instrumental in developing what's known as the National Center and State Collaborative Assessment, or NCSIC for short. Everything has an acronym, doesn't it? So the NCSIC assessment is aligned with college and career ready standards, and it is designed to replace ISTAR for us in the areas of English language arts and mathematics. As you well know, the ELA and math standards are the ones that we've recently adopted that are college and career ready. This is very different in terms of the way students interact on the assessment. You might be aware that ISTAR is actually a teacher-rated instrument, and so the teacher logs, if you will, in a system, in an online system, how well students are performing, and there is no interaction with students on the ISTAR. But with NCSIC, there actually would be interaction with students, and so that's something that the teachers are really excited about because they want students to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways, and that's something we'll be doing with the NCSIC assessment. Science and social studies is still going to continue to be ISTAR, certainly starting with 2015-16, as we listened to RFI presentations recently, the State Board Subcommittee on Assessment actually was listening to vendors who were talking about different ways that we could assess students who are eligible for an alternate assessment moving forward. But for spring 15, we are in place to use the ISTAR assessment, maintain that continuity for students as well as teachers in science and social studies. Supporting educators is something that we take very seriously, and we've been doing quite a bit of work with educators. As I mentioned, educators were actually part of the development of NCSIC with us, so in partnership with the department staff. But certainly we have many avenues that we've actually been developing and working with teachers on, especially with regard to instruction, making sure that students have access to the standards and that the instructional strategies that are used by teachers encourage students to be able to demonstrate their knowledge in new ways. And we can share some of those with you if you have questions about that today. We have been piloting the items. We started in the spring of 14. There will also be a pilot in the fall of 14. And because these are very different, there are certain tiers. There are 3 tiers within the assessment. Without getting into lots of detail and technical information, I just want you to know that students actually enter the assessment where their level is, and they demonstrate their knowledge based on their tier. So we do have a lot of professional development planned. We've actually started doing quite a bit of professional development as we built the NCSIC. We had a community of practice that started way back in 2011. And again, we're really excited about having some opportunities for students with regard to this assessment. Want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have, and I know there's a resolution, so I'll turn it back over to Superintendent Ritz.
Any questions?
Yeah, I just have one
Yes.
quick question.
Sure.
The piloting that you said you did, could you give us a little more information about
Sure.
how large that sampling was?
So we actually, well, many states are actually using the NICSIC assessment, so we piloted it not just in Indiana, but we offered the opportunity for every school corporation to participate, and I'm excited to say that we did have many that wanted to because they wanted to have access to what those items actually looked like.
Can you give us an approximate
I'm
number?
thinking Kristen might know. She's looking right now, so we'll give you a definite number. One of the reasons I was excited to see really good response in terms of piloting is because this is very different. It's not a teacher-rated assessment, and so giving students some access and getting feedback from the staff was really important. What worked well, what should be different as we're still developing the assessment, so that we got that feedback in time to have another pilot in the fall.
And you anticipate, once this is adopted, that it's gonna change in another year or 2 years as we move down the road with all our other assessment changes?
So, just a minute, let me get
Sure.
back to your first question if I may. It looks like we had 1,800 teachers, okay, 221, I think, if I'm reading this right, I'm sorry. 221 teachers administered 717 assessments in the pilot. And actually, this was phase 1, which was ELA and math. And we also have a second phase, as I've indicated, which is ELA, math, and writing, which will be also very interesting since I started to include, again, any interaction with students. I hope I've answered the first question. Your second question was, will this change? And I think certainly we have vendors that are interested in bidding on having a different test for the future. But really, I think the field will help us know whether or not this is something that we should continue using for the future. So.
Michelle, but before I take it, Michelle, could you explain again the actual population of students that actually would take this assessment? I'm not sure that's clear.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. These are students who are the most significant in terms of cognitive disabilities. You might hear us talk about the 1% assessment. Some people call ISTAR the 1% assessment, so it's approximately 1% of the population.
Amos?
And the other question, in the test, was there an achievement gap based upon race and ethnicity?
That's
Was
an,
it comparable to what ISTAR is now?
that I don't think we know because we actually haven't set any cut scores on the assessment. We're just in the pilot stage. And what you're referring to is actually what's called a diff analysis, or differentiated item functioning analysis, based on all the subgroups. And so that is something that we actually will study to make sure that it is very equitable. And that's something that we would do once we move to operational and review the data.
So that would be done before it goes operational, that results?
Before we actually bring to you the cut scores, we would have done that analysis.
And that will be made public?
Yes, certainly.
Yes.
My question's in line with that, which Amos asked. And what communities, or could you give me some of the demographics of the school corporations or schools that participated in your pilot?
That's a great question. I'm looking to Kristen because it's not on the sheet. I don't think we have that with us, but we would be glad to forward that on to
Well,
Claire
I think that's very
Reed's
pertinent
office. Sure,
in the reliability and validity studies that you're doing with the piloting.
definitely.
Okay.
We had a voluntary setting in the spring, and we definitely want to make sure that when we use the fall pilot, that we have a demographically representative sample. Kind of back to Mr. Brown's question, I think in looking at a variety of subgroups, but the first time out of the gate, we wanted to make sure it was very open. Any teacher that was interested could participate. And then, again, that was in the last week, I believe, of April or May, now that I'm looking at her sheet. But I think we want to make sure, obviously, as a state, that we have all groups represented. And so one of the things we will be doing is, similar to what we do with ISTEP, is making sure that when we pilot the items in the fall, that we actually have that representative sample.
My next question is not related to the piloting and special needs and special education is not my forte. But from talking with my students, I understand that there is a waiver at the high school level for students who are physically handicapped or have some major handicaps, but that does not exist at the elementary level. Is that true? And if so, are you proposing to the roundtable some relief in that situation? And the reason I ask that question is,
No, it's a good question.
I just finished volunteering as an assistant principal in a school for a year, and I won't do that again and continue with my own responsibilities, but I did it this past academic year. And this particular school has an inordinate number of special needs children. I mean, they're being trained to use the restroom, they're being trained to speak, but we're still testing them, and I want to know why.
So let me talk a little bit about the medical necessity waiver, and then actually can talk about the 3 tiers that are involved in the NCSIC assessment. So one of the things that we do have in place, and it's actually for 3 through 8 and 10, is the medical necessity waiver. So if a student is actually medically unable to participate in the assessment, then that's something that they actually petition our office to have an exemption for that student in terms of taking the assessment.
But my understanding is it only applies to high school and not to elementary?
No, it actually does start in grade 3. So all of I-STEP grades 3 through 8 and 10 are included.
Okay,
So I'm
good
glad you asked
information.
the question
Okay,
today.
thank you.
I think because what you also described are maybe functional skills, that some of these students are learning how to take care of themselves, personal hygiene, more than just academics, but also important academics. And so that's why we also have the 3 tiers, so that we can make sure we're assessing students at the level of entrance into the assessment.
And maybe we should clarify, ISTAR actually assesses those functional skills.
It does.
The teacher actually puts in information to assess that, as well as we are also proposing that the science and the social studies that's already within ISTAR remain, so that we can continue, educators can continue to have access to that kind of assessment piece
Right.
for their children.
And I think an important point too is that ISTAR can actually be used for progress monitoring, so teachers can certainly use that as well.
So really, this assessment is just for language arts and mathematics.
That's true.
Yes.
And the reason that we're leaving I-STAR because they aren't qualified to test what we want tested?
Right, so ISTAR actually is not aligned to our new standards, our new college and career ready standards. So that's the main reason why we're actually changing to an assessment that is aligned to our new standards.
Great questions. Others? I believe you have a resolution before you. And be it resolved that the Roundtable recommends to the Board that the ISTAR assessment for English Language Arts and Mathematics be replaced by the National Center and State Collaborative NCSIC assessment. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? Yeah, I made a motion for the resolution. Do we have a second? Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye, or do we do roll? Do we do roll? Okay, take roll, please. Sorry?
Mr. Bertram?
Yes.
Mr. Bland?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Representative Bainey?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
Mr. Brinegar?
Yes.
Ms. Day?
Yes.
Mr. Dwyer?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Mr. Hubbard?
Yes.
Dr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Kiley?
Just a quick question, is this one of the requirements for us to get our NCLB waiver?
It is.
Okay,
It was
Aye.
written into the waiver before my term.
okay, aye.
Senator Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Lechtenberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Lubbers?
Yes.
President McRobbie?
Yes.
Ms. Meredith?
Yes.
Representative Smith?
Yes.
Dr. Robinson?
Yes.
Senator Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Sanders?
Yes.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Stanzikevich?
Yes.
Mr. Tebby?
Yes.
Mr. Ward?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes.
Governor Pence?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a presentation of the resource guides. Danielle Shockey, Deputy Superintendent, is going to make a presentation.
My best teacher voice. So Governor Pence, Superintendent Ritz, members of the Roundtable, I hope everybody can hear me. And the reason I'm doing it from this spot here is we're actually taking you to the newly designed resource site on the Indiana Department of Education, where all these resource support materials that we've created will sit. So this is actually somewhat important because this was done very thoughtfully in terms of where we know our teachers find our materials, as well as we don't want them to have more than 3 clicks to find the information they need to support the new standards. So, is there anybody who cannot hear me? Okay. So therefore, back on April 21st, Mr. Brenninger, he brought forth a resolution that the department, upon the new adoption of standards for English language arts and mathematics, would bring forth to you the resource materials. Specifically, there were 4 resource materials that were requested that we bring to you. Those included sample math problems, modeling content and process. We were to bring before you a reading list, a sample of grade level text complexity, as well as inclusion of nonfiction text. That's okay, I can hold it, I'm strong. Mr. Dwyer, figure out how we can do this not so I don't hit you 100 times. Okay. So I'm not going to repeat what I just said unless anybody feels I need to. So anyway, there are 4 materials for which you hope to see as resource materials. I want to bring that up because what we're going to show you today on our WebSource resource site is there are those 4 materials, and then there are many other resource materials the department has created, and then there are more materials that are in process to be created. So I'm going to walk you through all those things so you can see how well teachers are going to be able to access this information at a click of a finger, as well as go into great depth.
Excuse me, do you take questions during the, or do you want us to wait?
I'd rather you wait if you don't mind, unless it's something burning, Mr. Olson.
Well, you just said that these will be ready. When will they all be ready?
Well, okay, so the goal for the 4 items you were to receive today was by July 1st. So they also go to the state board today for presentation, and once the state board is also in agreement, they're ready to be live. That's the beauty of this website. It's actually just in hidden mode.
So
can
did
make
you
these
say
all
there were
live in the
some
field.
other resources that are not yet done but will be in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And when will those be done?
We have an order in which they're going to come out. The very next one we'd like to have out is the assessment blueprint. We're still working with CTV on the assessment.
So as the teachers prepare, when will the last resource guide be prepared for the teachers?
These are ongoing. For example, some of the ones that are going to come forth would be things like how to additionally support second language learners. So these are always ongoing.
So will everything be ready before the academic year begins?
No, there's a few things that will probably be done by
So
September
they will not be
and
done?
ongoing. So when you go to this first site, you can go to any standards content. So whether I'm the science teacher, the social studies teacher, and so forth. So I have one place where all my standards sit. In this case, we're going to go to mathematics. You received all of these things in your inbox over the last couple of weeks, so you've seen them. I know, your inboxes were very full, and we apologize, but that goes to show, I think, the plethora of resources that have been created. The one piece that's been ever evolving is the Indiana reading list. So you did get a new print copy of the Indiana reading list before you today. So as you scroll down, each site, whether you're in science, social studies, English language arts, or science, will have links for educators, parents, and community members. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time looking at these real quickly for educators. So the first thing you can see is all the standards. Quickly, if I'm a teacher, I'm going to go to the site. I can find my standards for any grade level. And then you're going to find the correlation documents. And I'm going to pause here. You didn't ask for us to bring back the correlation documents to you today for review. But this was the first thing that already has been pushed out to the field several weeks ago. And as a classroom teacher myself, I can tell you this is the most important resource that the department could have issued. And so therefore, it was the first on our priority list. So as a 4th grade teacher, I can pull up my math resource correlation guide. And what this showcases is the Indiana academic standards of old, the new standards that were adopted, as well as the differences. So essentially, I could just look to this third column and say, oh, I've been teaching graphing all of my fourth grade teaching career. With the new standards, I need to now add a line graph. It's moved from fifth grade to fourth grade, or whatever this shift may be. So I think the resource guide is probably, in my opinion, as a teacher, this would have been the first place I'd want to look. Beyond the resource guide, so beyond the standards and then the correlation, you'll find resource guides. This is where you're going to find your sample math problems that model content and process, which is part of the resolution for which you all brought forth. So let's go to fourth grade. And I wish I could make this bigger, but again, you've all received this in your inbox. The columns here at the top say the Indiana standard, so I can just go right here and I can see my standard, I can see the number of the standard, the language of the standard, the highlighted vocabulary words. So again, another resource we have as a separate document is a glossary, but then we also pulled any important words that were in the standard in fourth grade, and it has its own column. Then there are sample examples of the problem here, and then on the fourth column are links. So as a teacher, I can find rubrics if necessary, if it's problem solving. I can find black line templates of ways to teach the standard. So each one of these has, every standard in every grade level in mathematics has a site or an example just like this.
And then those links on the first page of that piece was general mathematics website pieces that made assist to them.
Scrolling down a little farther, another thing, again, not part of the resolution for this body, but important all the same for the classroom teacher, is this vertical articulation. So this means as a fourth grade teacher, it is important to me to know within my standard, let's take again the graphing element, what did they learn in third grade? What are they going to need to know for fifth grade? And what's my role in fourth grade? So that's what you see when you get vertical articulation documents. Then furthermore, we now have resources for educators beyond those above, and then parents, and then community members. So the ones that are blue are ones that are live and ready to go upon basically the approval of this body and the Roundtable, or the State Board of Education. So we have our glossary and vocabulary separate as a document, as well as embedded in those examples above. We have online communities of practice. You're going to see this on both language arts and mathematics. What this is a place for teachers to come and share and talk to one another. So that's what our online communities of practice are going to be for. The ones in development are things like an assessment blueprint, as I mentioned, the differentiated resources for students with disabilities as well as students of second language learners. And that is in addition to the WIDA standards that are for second language learners. So these are more examples and templates and places they can go. We will also, and I believe, and I'm looking to Amy Horton, I believe the lesson plan alignment tool and the model content frameworks will be ready before the school year begins, to answer Mr. Elsner's question. And then for parents, these are ever evolving. These are some examples of some things we'd like to have available for parents and community members. So if I'm a parent, how do I help my child who's struggling math homework? What are some great resources for summer reading in the English language arts site? So that's what you will find under parents and the community member links. I will take questions on math before I move over to ELA.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. For the parents, when we're trying to empower parents, we're also teaching them the standards and helping them to understand as well. Will you have examples similar to the way you have for the educators page where they will be able to see the kinds of problems?
Actually, we designed this page with that in mind. So we actually put on purpose educators, parents, and community below the examples because those examples are actually written. So back where I showed you the example bar,
Right.
Those examples are written in ways that a parent could also go into there and look at that and say, oh, that's what that standards means. That's an example, a visual of what this is trying to teach.
Is that there on the sample? Can you show us what a parent or a community looks like?
No, I'm sorry. I guess what I'm saying is we did not.
All of those.
We did not put our examples just for educators. Our examples
Those are for everybody.
sit above it because anybody could go into the standards
Okay.
or the examples and see, oh, that's what a bar graph is. Because those examples are illustrated. Let me show all of them again.
Yeah, show that example again.
And I'll try to make it big.
So
I know that's-
all of those are available to parents.
Okay.
standard, I'm gonna, again, try to see if I can make it any bigger. The standard reads, read and write whole numbers up to 1,000. That's the standard. The illustrated example, and it's asking to do it in what we call word or numeric form as well as pictorial form. So this example is an example of numerical form and picture form. So we tried to make our examples to be specific to the standard, but also not so teacher specific that a parent couldn't find this resource as helpful. Does that make sense?
Yes. Bill? Yeah, Bill?
If I'm a seventh grade teacher, even with the correlation document, Danielle, how likely is it that I can use the same textbook that I used last school year?
So we, so as I look at our correlation documents, there are differences, but again, the differences are rather, I don't want to say simplistic. The content and the breadth of what a seventh grade teacher needs to teach has not shifted that much. It's a simple changes, things like, okay, I always taught graphing, but now I have to also teach line graph in addition to the high graph. So I don't know that teachers are going to have too much difficulty finding resources, but if they did, then I would suggest they go into this document and our links give them lesson plan examples. So let's say even if it's a seventh grade teacher, there's a little bit of content shift and it's not in my textbook, that's where we would hope they would use this fourth column to get lesson plan examples and ideas.
That's great, very understandable. Then how's that translated to the students? Because then when the student goes home, they have their textbook,
Right.
But now they don't have necessarily the link to the correlation document.
So what we
how
also
can
did-
parents help their kids with their homework?
Sure. No, it's a great question. We recognize that, and so we reached out to all the vendors in Indiana who are either identified through the Department of Education for reading, because we actually do have an identified list of reading vendors, and then we have an identified list of math vendors for which they gave their textbooks to us upon adoption of the last adoption. And so we reached out to them, we sent our correlation documents, and we said we implore you to essentially look very closely at our correlation documents. If there's any supplemental materials or addendums to your textbooks that are adopted in the field, if you would be willing to work with the department to make something available at low cost or no cost to those schools. So we sent that memo out, it's probably been about a month ago to all of our vendors. No response. We actually said we'd love to help you.
Not to us.
And so far, none have sent anything to us, but we hope what they're doing is actually, because we don't have a role at the Department of Education in terms of, we used to in Indiana have a recommended textbook list, and you had to choose from that list. At this point now, locals are able to spend their dollars for materials from many vendor sources. So we sent to all the vendor sources we're aware of, and we said, we'd love to help you in this effort. So that's been our attempt so far.
Actually still have recommended, it's not mandatory. I'd view that a little differently. How do parents access this information? Through what website or?
The Indiana Department of Education, and if in our search box, well, first of all, on our very homepage, we have what's called Trending Now, or kind of the most hit on topics, and assessments sits there, and so does standards. And then, or you could type into the bar standards, and this is where it would take them, and then parents, I'll go back to the beginning here. So this is the first page everybody would go to, which is standards. And then if I'm a parent and I'm looking for mathematics.
So no login or anything like
No,
that?
no, nothing like that, no. Question?
I was just going to follow up.
Yeah.
And if the supplemental materials are not available from the textbook provider, the links that you provide on the correlation document, a teacher may be able to have handouts from those links or something that can be sent home with the child for homework.
Yes, those
or
links,
something
most
like
all of them actually have what we call Black Line Masters. So it's not just a lesson plan for the teacher, it's actually the materials for which the student would also receive.
that they can take home.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Danielle, going back to the parents, we have a section that says parents, educators, and so why would you not put those standards under there as well? Because my concern would be a parent would be looking for a place where they could find parental information. They see parents on there, and they may never click into that. They may go directly to the parent and not to the, does that make sense to you?
Sure, I understand what you're saying, and we can redo this, and it's a great suggestion. So we have it in both places. We actually have it above. So I just clicked on mathematics again. So again, I'm a parent, I'm going in there, I'm looking for resources for mathematics. I can scroll down and I can get my parent link here. Or I can see my standards by grade level and then go below it, and then I have my parents again. So we can remap this in any way.
Well, actually, I'm just going to add to it. At the very top of our website,
Yes,
you'll notice, right, At the very, very top of our website, you'll notice that you can go in as an educator, an administrator, community. You can go in as a parent person, and you can actually click on there, and it takes you, all of it will be on those pages as well. So it'll all be interlinked.
Yeah, I'm not a technology expert, but I know our team is working on making sure these are all intermapped,
Correct.
basically, so you can go in any direction.
We use technology, but I don't think we understand how many parents really don't have a good handle on this. Have you thought about sending to each school corporation very quick links to be added to A, the corporation website, and B, individual building websites, where parents can find this really simply? Because I'm finding parents are not going to dig that deep in many cases.
That's pretty simple for us to do, because I do a weekly
Yes,
communication
I
to
see it every
superintendents
week,
and
yes.
principals. And so we could easily put a parent piece in there and say, please put this in your newsletter. So, yeah, that's something easy we can do.
So literacy looks much like math, broken out for parents, community, and educators. Again, here you have your standards first. You then have the correlation guides, much like the mathematics for every grade level. Under the educators, this one's a little bit more expansive at this point. This first one, while it looks bulky, really talks about an educator's toolkit for everything in K-12 reading selection. And part of the resolution from this body were 2 elements that are in this toolkit. And those were the samples of grade level text complexity, as well as the inclusion of nonfiction text. So these are broken out separate as well as in this reading toolkit, so you can get them in either place. And when we talk about text complexity, just because a book may be on the back of the book, say it's written for a certain grade level, is the comprehension complexity right for the students in that grade level? So this is helping the teachers say, okay, I teach 4th grade. This book says the reading level is for a 4th grader, but is the content appropriate for a 4th grader? So we're trying to help teachers understand that sometimes, just because the reading level might align, we also want you to study the complexity of it. We have examples of a couple different texts within this. We have one for Charlotte's Web, we have one for upper grades, and we actually want this to grow, and we want this to grow with help from the field. So as teachers use our text complexity rubric, and they use a book they love in their classroom, we're gonna have a place for them to upload the use of our rubric with a book of their choice. So this will be a place where teachers are gonna share with one another. We then also have a K-12 English Language Arts glossary and vocabulary, again, much like the mathematics one I showed you. We have our reading list by genre and grade span, and that's the one document I mentioned you do have before you today different. So I will open that one, because it has, again, been updated. And I want to commend our team, our College and Career Ready team at the Department of Education, as well as lots of people who gave us feedback on this, including some of our state board members, including Mr. Steve Baker, the governor's office. We have lots of people give us input on our reading list, and we made sure that we use that text complexity rubric. So again, some books might be great for a read aloud at a certain grade level, but the books on this list reflect the right complexity of a book, the appropriateness in alignment to standards, as well as the genre that's expected to be studied at that grade level. So that's the reading list. Scroll down here. We also have links. I'm going to take questions in a minute, but I want to end with our Hoosier Family of Readers, which is a special, amazing project that's been started under the superintendent since she started in office. So we're going to end there, but you can see here that's important for us. The importance of reading needs to be understood by classroom teachers, community members, parents, and over our, the partners for which we have who have signed on for Hoosier Family of Readers. But we also have that listed under parents. And then we have something called Mion, we have Hoosier Family of Reader, and we have book lists. We have something called First Book for the community members in terms of getting books into children's hands. So again, the idea behind both of these sites is this is a hub for everything literacy, everything mathematics, everything science, everything social studies. Any questions on the content of the literacy site?
Excuse me.
I do.
How many workshops have we conducted with educators on this project of making sure we have alignment? The issue of textbooks, we've sent a letter. My second question, what have we done to follow up about that? Because the textbook, especially for a young teacher, is what they use quite a bit. So we've sent a letter. What materials do we have? How many workshops have we had? How many do we have planned this summer?
We actually have, through our e-learning division, we have 17 planned, and I'm also looking for Amy Horton, so I think we have 11.
So it's just the e-learning connection?
No, I mean, we have 2 different versions of summer workshops, and both of them have content related to just standards alignment, correlation documents.
How many
resources
presence workshops are you gonna have, do you have planned, or how many have you had so far in this alignment?
So far, that's why I'm looking for her. I don't know how many have actually happened to date. I know last week there was at least 4. We also have some.
Are
that's
these
through Title
e-learning,
I.
or are these conferences
We
you're
have,
having?
we have
on-
19
Right.
conferences. We have
There's
9,
also-
You've had 19 on this
we
issue?
have 19 scheduled this summer. And then we have others under English language learner.
And we also have them through Title I. So last week I know there was
So
4
you have
Title I
you
meetings.
have
All-
workshops on this?
All of our,
and-
all of
is
our
that what
summer
you have?
workshops are focusing on standards.
When will those happen?
They happen all summer. I can get a list for you and all the dates.
I would appreciate it.
No problem.
I'd like to follow up on Dan's question. On the conferences or workshops that you've had already, how many teachers have attended? Do you know the total number of teachers?
I would love to give you all the lists of all the dates and the attendance so far. I think that'd be really helpful. If you don't mind, we can send it to you, because I know I'm getting finger signs back here. I know we've had 9 in one area, but let me break them out by category. Because we are hosting Title I conferences. We are first hosting second language learner teacher conferences. We are hosting e-learning conferences, and they're all really kind of drawing on a different demographic of teacher. So I want to be able to really give you who's attending what kind of conference, but the strand on standards is the same across. So our college and career team has created a presentation on all these materials that you're seeing here, so that every group, regardless of what conference you come to, and whether we've even been a part of different principal conferences so far, and we plan to be a part of those in the summer. When asked, we are making the same presentation to all groups.
Superintendent Ritz, as you know from the State Board of Ed, we've been very concerned about the rollout and the conferences and the explanation work at textbook companies. We've also received waiver documents that talk about what we will do, not what we have done, and how well it's been implemented. So my general concern, I share the governor's interest in these high standards and quality assessments, and tying these high standards and not taking a year off and being on top of things. Parents, educators, principals, they have to have the materials. This has to be done on time, has to be well attended, and has to be high quality. That will be the key to success. So the general concern is, are we behind? How do we get up to speed in implementing this in a way that's, first of all, acceptable to us, the educators and people with high standards, but also our waiver requirement, and that's my concern. I hear some confusion over and over, and in the waiver documents I see confusion, or we talk about what we will do instead of what we have done, and this will be essential if we're going to be successful
Mr.
in
Elsner,
serving our students well.
I can assure you that we are on top of everything with the many conferences that we've got going on this summer and everyone hitting standards. We are, and getting these rolled out as soon as we can here even today. We just have to hit a button and these are going to be live. As well as we plan lots of initiatives even after the summer, all the way through the school year. So teachers are very used to being a part of this process of standards rollout. They will be contributing as well, especially as we start doing all the lesson plan pieces. And to go back to your point, Bill, the teachers start sharing what it is that they are using, and those will be posted on there. We have actual forums for teachers to communicate with each other to get good information and good resources. So we're on top of everything, and I think everybody's going to be pleased. We've had very positive responses at all of our conferences we've had so far, and we have them all summer long. So we couldn't roll it out any more thorough than holding so many conferences and making sure that teachers have access to all the standards information.
I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I don't see it in the documentation.
Yes.
What I need, I'm no longer a young teacher, I'm aware of that. What I need to know when I go in there is what am I going to be assessed on? What am I responsible for? And if I have some examples of some of the, we talked about last time, some of the terminology that it may take a PhD to figure out, then I can go to work. And I think most of my colleagues are in the same boat. We can go to work if I've got that stuff. If not, somebody slipped up getting a license.
And your point's well taken, because we've already put out the most important documents to teachers, the correlation documents and the vertical alignment, so they know exactly what they're teaching. The vocabulary is highlighted, the glossaries are there, the examples are ready to go. And I guess I would concur, as a teacher, as Danielle said, those were the most important documents to me. I'm a trained professional. I should be able to take that and go do what I need to do with my curriculum. And the more help that we can give people, the better. But we're going to have everything ready, as teachers need to have them. Keep in mind, I'm a 34-year veteran teacher, so I know what I need to have in order to do new standards and make sure that things go. Danielle's got quite a bit of experience too, as most of the people at the department. So we have quite a bit of communication with the field, and we're excited about what we have ready to go right now. And we're going to push the button as soon as today's over. It'll be out there in the hands of the superintendents and principals and into the hands of the educators and online, and be ready to go.
And to Mr. Shields' point, the assessment blueprint is, I think, what you're describing, and I look to Michelle, but I know that's our very next piece to come out. Do you have a deadline for your team for the assessment blueprint?
Yeah, we're hoping to finalize it next week.
I can look at that stuff later than some.
Okay,
because of that
no
many number of
problem.
years.
No problem.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, how aligned are the new standards to DIBELS and Acuity? Will there be any changes in those programs?
We're really excited to say that Acuity is going to be aligned to the new standards and the new assessment. So CTB McGraw-Hill has been a great partner with us to do that and be ready for this fall. And then you also asked about DIBELS.
Yeah.
DIBELS, and I'm not going to try to be the specialist here, but as I understand DIBELS, it's not necessarily linked to standards. It's a reading passage for which a student reads, and so therefore it's not aligned to any set of one standards.
Right, but it becomes the foundation for what you do when you get to third grade, right?
I'm going to turn to Michelle just as the assessment director, so I think I just gave you my
That's
content
correct.
knowledge of DIBELS.
Yes.
And so DIBELS certainly still plays an important
It
role,
plays
and
an
that's something
important
that we
role,
have
right.
available for teachers this school year, yes.
Yeah. Let me just make one observation, and I think Representative Boehner could attest to this. Both of us attended the Models Schools Conference last year, and I was just thrilled with what I experienced there. But I came back singing the praises of a program called NextPert, and I think that's the right term for it, right? The support. Okay, the support program. But anyway, I found in working this year in the schools that this state is doing a great job with providing the same kinds of things that was a part of that $1,500 program. The problem is, and it goes back to what one of the members of this body was saying, they were talking about focus on the parents. I think we got some aged teachers who are not using the technology that would be so prescriptive for them in trying to meet the needs of their children. I do applaud you on having the visuals, because there are a lot of visual learners, a lot of right brain learners. And so we, and as Mr. Shields was saying, some of those standards takes a scholarly person to be able to interpret them. And I'm not saying the teachers are not scholarly, but it takes somebody at a higher level to be able to interpret it. But you give them a picture, and so many times they can replicate it, and they know what you're talking about. And so I just wanted to, first of all, I guess it's an indirect way, compliment you on having something there. And that's why I asked if it was going to be aligned, because I think that it's, I know for our school to make some growth, we didn't get to the level of proficiency, but we made the growth because we taught to the standards, didn't teach the standards. I mean, didn't teach the test, but we taught to the standards. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Ken.
As the author of the resolution that generated this activity and these materials, I'm enjoying this conversation. I also thank the co-chairs for delaying this meeting so that more time could occur to put more materials together, and it looks like there's a number of things that have been together, and I know this is going to be an ongoing, evolving process as we provide more and more standards-based resource materials to the schools and the educators Danielle, could you talk a little bit about the efforts and the process to date at benchmarking these materials, the reading list, and the other materials to the new standards, and also maybe what's envisioned relative to that going forward as well?
I guess I would just start by saying everything we're doing is benchmarked to our new standards. So I'll take the reading list as an example.
And is that being done right now by the internal experts within the Department of Education?
It is, as well as, and they're reaching out to members of the field. So I'll start with my reading comment, and then I'm going to go into a math comment.
Sure.
So the reading comment would be, for example, non-fiction reading materials. They took a lot of time to make sure if in science and social studies they were recommending reading, for example, let's say H is for hurricane, and it's not on our reading list, but I'm just going to use that example, that it was in the grade level for which weather was being taught. So that book might have been appropriate at a number of grade levels. It was only put in the grade level in which there was an alignment to the science and social studies standard. So it wasn't just an emphasis on the reading and language arts and the math standards, it was also across the curriculum. So that's the kind of conversations that were happening as a department as they created something like the reading list. A math example, so we put out our first set of drafts several weeks ago in math. I think it came to you guys maybe 2 weeks ago. Mr. Steve Baker, who's not in the room, was very thoughtful and reached out to some teachers he knew. And so he sent back some feedback to our math team. Our math team was also working with educators in the field, and so they made some changes. So we are definitely evolving, and we are making sure all of our samples, all of our examples, all of the links are aligned to what teachers hope to see as well as to the new standards. But our new standards is the lens for which we are creating everything.
Okay. And one more question, if I might. Can you also talk about the text complexity and what work is being done there to make sure that the materials that are being provided are the right level of complexity for that grade level and that subject area?
I guess I'm going to use an analogy that I may not be great at, but kind of how you teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a long time kind of idea. So we are working on teaching teachers how to run a complexity rubric against any reading material they want to use in their classroom. So we looked at a variety of other states on how they were doing text complexity, and we designed an Indiana rubric that says to, as a teacher, okay, if you want to read Charlotte's Web, how do you know that's the right complexity of text for your third grade classroom? So we have an example that goes with that, and we have the rubric for which they would use for any book they want to use in their classroom. We're going to collect those from across the state. We actually looked to, I believe it was, I'm looking at my team, what state has an example of this? Georgia? Georgia. So, so as these are evolving and being done across the field, I could go in by, let's say I want to find a text complexity rubric on Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. I would go into the Department of Education website, text complexity, type in Lois Lowry, or look at books that have already been done by title and find that a fourth grade teacher in Fort Wayne did a text complexity rubric on Number the Stars. My work is done for me. I now know that's perfect for my fourth grade classroom. And what are some resource materials I could use with it? So that's going to be ever evolving because we are asking the teachers to help us create this wealth of text complexity examples. I'm going to look to my team and invite any one of them, Mr. Wolf or Mr. Beatson or Caitlin, to the mic. Do you want to add to that at all? Aaron? Okay, I got it.
The department has taken everything on this list and done complexity work on it. So to make sure that it's lined. So let me give a quick example. Grade K and 1, Winnie the Pooh used to be on our list, on a reading list. But Winnie the Pooh, if any of you know what the book really looks like, it's about this thick, okay? It's a read aloud to first grade, but it's not a complexity for first graders. So the books that we have on the list now are really by complexity, and they've gone through analysis before we even put them on the list. And then we want to teach teachers how to do that within their own classrooms as they should be doing, and being trained at our higher education levels to do.
Probably, do all schools and all students have access to all these resources?
Are you talking about actually having access
for instance,
to the
reading
books?
list and the books and the materials and so forth? So we put out a reading list. Do all schools have access to them? Or is it left to individuals?
That's at the local level, as to determine which books they really do want to include within their curriculum.
Okay. Are there additional resources available for schools to make those purchases, given the timing of this, or is that just left to the individual
Go ahead, Mich-
decision
go
maker?
ahead.
Maybe just a good time to point out, this is just a suggested reading list. As a matter of fact, these are not required texts.
Right.
So because they're not required texts, what we really want teachers to recognize is, if I use a text complexity rubric, and I know as a second grade teacher, I want to teach main idea, I can essentially pull off any book off my shelf. I can make sure it's the right complexity for a second grade reader, and I'm gonna be able to teach my standards. I think that's somewhat of a maybe misconception about the teaching of reading. Most any good piece of literature, I can pull off my bookshelf and I can teach a second grade, third grade, fourth grade language arts standard. So these are just suggestions. These are not to be all-inclusive nor required.
But these are exemplars of the text complexity that they should be using. That's what they are.
Superintendent?
Yes.
I feel compelled to say, this has been an interesting conversation, but at the ground level, what practitioners and superintendents want you to do is what you did when you passed the standards. What we're very concerned about, and I've said this before, are what's going to happen with the assessments. I'll just explain what we've done since you passed the standards. We spent 2 days at the end of the year where we had just teachers, and I have 1,900. We divided them into grade levels. For example, we had all the 7th grade language arts teachers together, and what we taught them using some of the tools you provided is how to, we call it peel back a standard, because if teachers don't understand what's expected of them to teach, what students are supposed to be able to demonstrate, and then what resources they have either already, and in particular, textbooks we've already adopted. So we're spending all of our time giving teachers the power to do that. I think when you talk about what parents are going to understand and all those kinds of things, we're taking that responsibility, because with the old standards, we had to explain to our parents what they meant. So I think what you've given us is a frame, which is not done, and I think it's unrealistic to expect you to have gotten it done by July, but you've given what was asked. But I also think that the support districts are going to need is when the assessments come.
Right.
How are we going to teach teachers to get students ready to demonstrate standards? It's a totally different picture than what we have been doing, so I hope we don't get bogged down with reading lists.
We will not.
Because those are optional, and
Right,
we've already
right.
at
And they're
our
done.
level, well, and we already decide at our own district level. Teachers do that. I don't do that as a superintendent. But I think the conversation needs to be, okay, we have the standards. Let's be very deliberate about the assessments and whatever resources you're going to give. We need them helping teachers do the transition from, for example, the I-STAR conversation. That'll be massive. The communication alone to parents is going to be massive. The amount of time special ed teachers are going to need, that's the resources, and I hope those are the conversations we're going to have. These are a done deal, and people get online and get them. I have teachers who tore them apart before I even gave them the day to do it.
Right.
So
They were.
could we get to me, what really is the concern I have is you're going to hold me accountable for assessments. That's what teachers are worried about.
And I think I heard Michelle say next week or a week from now, that would be up on the site live for teachers, is the assessment blueprint, which I think is what you're asking. So if I'm a third grade teacher, it's great that I know my standards, it's great I know my correlation, but what does a student need to know and be able to do, and how is it going to be measured on that assessment? That's next.
So
See,
Michelle,
my
did you
teachers
want
will
to?
be excited about acuity and dibbles, because in a large urban district, we do frequent assessments that let us know where our kids are.
Right.
So our concern was whether that would be aligned, because that's a tool we use. Without it. So I just want to make sure we frame what really the issue is.
Michelle, did you want to make a comment on that?
Yes, that actually much more information is to come about the assessments, about professional development that we'll have, about sample items that teachers can use. So really helping students and adults get used to the new standards and how they'll be assessed. So we're glad you're looking forward to that.
All right, I think we're ready for the roundtable discussion of K-12 assessments. On that note? I don't think we have a resolution. This was just a review. At least I didn't see a resolution. Okay, thank you.
She's talking about this one.
Very good. Thank you, Superintendent Ritz. Good discussion, and Wendy, good setup for our next resolution. In fact, we're going to hear a presentation on a resolution concerning K-12 assessments, and I think Claire, are you going to stand or are you going to sit?
I'll probably sit because of the microphone. I've been told that people can't hear.
That's helpful. Okay.
So.
ensure transparency online. We'll have her sit, and so Claire's recognized for the presentation. And then we will move after that into discussion and then a consideration of the resolution, which you should have a copy of in front of you.
Great. Thank you, Governor Penson. Thank you, Superintendent Ritz, members of the roundtable. The governor did lean over and ask me to keep this presentation brief, as we had a lengthy discussion around the resource guide. So I will provide you with, can you hear it? Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I will provide you with an overview of our objectives today, with the focus being we would really like to get your policy guidance to inform the State Board of Education as it works to develop an RFP that it's going to issue in July for vendors to respond to create a new assessment system starting in the 15-16 school year. So that's our primary objective for today. We will share this PowerPoint with you for some of the other background information that I will skip over in the interest of time. As members of the Roundtable are aware, it's the Roundtable's duty to make recommendations to the State Board of Education related to assessments, and that's the purpose of this conversation here today. I do want to note for you that the State Board of Education voted to create an assessment committee in April. That committee has met 5 times. And in terms of what we've accomplished thus far, we did have an RFI issued, and there was a presentation by 6 of the respondents to the RFI in June, where we received information in response to the RFI. That information, along with your guidance today and the State Board of Education conversation at its July 9th board meeting, will help to inform the RFP parameters before that is issued for responses. I do want to point out that our existing contracts for our state assessments expire on June 30th, so just in a few short days. And it's my understanding from Dr. Michelle Walker that the department is working on extending those to make sure that we have consistency in place for the next school year. As I mentioned, we've already begun the procurement process with the RFI process. And our task going into July is to design the RFP. And we are moving at a fast clip to ensure that we receive responses back so that the State Board of Ed can select vendors and we can execute the contracts in time for careful design going into the 15-16 school year. This has already been mentioned, but it's a requirement under federal law as well as within our flexibility waiver from the federal government that we must implement an operational assessment in the 14-15 school year that's aligned with our new state assessments that this body here voted to recommend in April, and that the board approved April 28th. In fact, the department is already working with the existing vendor, CTB McGraw-Hill, to make sure that they're aligning the testing item types with the new standards. And in addition, that we are preparing some of the technology-enhanced and other college and career-ready items that the federal government requires. And similarly, we are also working with the vendor for the ECA's Questar to make sure that the testing content is expanded to align with the new standards. Okay, moving into the meat of this conversation. We have been working, as I mentioned, through the assessment committee in a collaborative fashion with the Department of Education, the Roundtable, State Board of Ed, Commission for Higher Education, and Department of Workforce Development on what are our future assessment needs, keeping in mind the linkages across the systems, those different systems. The policy decisions we would like to discuss with you today, and this is reflected in the resolution that you were sent on Friday, and there's an updated version in front of you today, and I will talk through the updates just so you're clear on that, are across these topics. The grade span for the assessments, what would be the graduation examination or the GQE, assessments for college and career readiness as required under state statute, determining remediation needs, which is also now a new requirement under state statute, the IREAD 3, the form of the test, and then assessment costs. So turning first to the grade span, the question that we are seeking to get your guidance on is for what grade should there be state mandated tests? And I can look to Dr. Walker on this, but the federal government does require tests in certain grades. For ELA and math, that's 3rd through 8th grade and 10th grade. We also took into consideration validity and reliability of assessments below grade 3, time spent testing versus on instruction, especially during the early elementary years, vertical alignment, which is required for valid and reliable growth data, and then the cost of assessments. And the recommendations that we have come up together on is that there would continue to be no mandated testing in grades K through 2. We would, however, provide optional formative assessments in grades K through 10, and then we would mandate summative assessments in grades 3 through 10. And I want to point out that this is actually a change. We are recommending the addition of a 9th grade test, which would provide an additional indicator of remediation needs and readiness for the next step. That test would be aligned with the content taught in that grade level. So we think this will be a valuable tool to help high schools develop targeted instruction. In addition, that also allows us to extend the vertical scale that we currently have with the I-STEP in grades 3 through 8 into grade 10, which would allow us to calculate for the first time growth in high school. Before I move on to the next item, any questions on this?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I don't see the letters ECA up there. So what does a 9th and 10th grade I-STEP exam mean for the current end of course assessment exams?
That will be on the next slide.
I'll wait patiently.
Okay, that's okay. Great.
Other questions?
Okay, great. Thank you for that lead in. So that then leads to the question, what should the GQE be? And in what year of high school should the GQE be administered? And some considerations that we took into account is that math courses begin to vary after the 8th grade, which makes it challenging to develop one assessment that every student is prepared to take. Right now, the Algebra 1 end of course assessment can be administered as early as 8th grade, I think sometimes earlier, and it depends entirely on when a student has actually taken that course. There are some considerations regarding due process rights for any changes to the GQE that we might propose, which is recommended here by our staffs. So those were all considerations we took into account in coming up with our recommendation that we would shift the GQE to the new grade 10 I-STEP and then phase out the end of course assessments, which for those due process reasons we would have to do over at least 2 to 3 years. Now, this is an important conversation that there are details to be worked out with the math GQE, and we would recommend that the math content and course alignment be developed in consultation with national and local experts in math and math pathways. And in fact, there is a contract in place right now. The Roundtable and Department of Education are working with the Dana Center at University of Texas. In addition, we have had a recent conversation with Complete College America, and there's been some robust conversation about what that would look like. So I just want to point that out to you, that would have to be carefully thought through if this were to be implemented. Any questions on that? Yes.
On 10th grade I-STEP, or the return of 10th grade I-STEP, is that then going to be a 3 times and you're out? In other words, you have, if you do not pass at the 10th grade the first time, you get a second shot at grade 11 and 12 before any waiver consideration is given? Because I see nothing about that in any of the material or in the resolution.
Dr. Walker?
So I think obviously our past practice when we had a 10th grade GQE, which doesn't seem very long ago, but we actually had opportunities each semester for the student to participate in the assessment, and that's what we actually do right now with ECAs. I think we have established a practice within Indiana that we have multiple opportunities for students to receive remediation and have additional opportunities to take the assessment, and if they aren't able to demonstrate those knowledge and skills required, but they can do so in a different manner, that's where the waiver comes in.
So we would then be going back to the practice that existed at 10th grade I-STEP. In other words, you don't make it sophomore, you get 2 more shots at the...
And that's our current practice with the ECAs as well.
I have another question. Recency is always an issue around assessment. You know, how soon after taking a particular course would you have an assessment that aligns with those standards? I mean, and over time, we've, I think, consistently encouraged students to take math or Algebra 1 in earlier grades. We see more and more students taking it 8th grade. Is there any concern that aligning Algebra 1 at grade 10 will actually create an incentive to push Algebra 1 toward the assessment.
So I think, just to clarify, I think we're not talking necessarily about Algebra 1 at grade 10, but having a group of experts to identify what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we should be measuring in grade 10 if we return to grade 10 as a GPA.
So it would not be aligned to any particular course.
More about the domain
course's
itself, the domain
domain.
of mathematics.
So, but there will have to be some upper limit, correct? Either
Correct.
it's going to measure Algebra 1 or geometry or Algebra 2. There's going to be some upper limit.
Yeah,
Correct.
a level of math
Which then,
proficiency.
once that occurs, then there's going to be behaviors that are triggered as a result of that. So if that happens at Algebra 1, I could see more and more schools saying we want to align Algebra 1 as close to the exam as possible. So whatever those, I just think that's the only concern I have. And I would just caution us as we align that we're very clear about what that is, and we don't create the behaviors that actually do the opposite of what we've been trying to do for the last several years.
Well, the good news is that we still have to get responses from vendors telling us how they can meet these policy objectives, and if we determine that they can't, then there's no reason that we'd have to proceed with something that had poorly aligned incentives like you've just described.
Bill? So did the ECAs not work? What problem are we solving here? Why, as has been stated before, are we kind of going back to what we had before we created the ECAs? Can you help just describe the rationale behind the recommendation?
I would prefer Dr. Walker to speak to the math in particular, but I think Algebra 1, as I've mentioned, can be taken as early as 8th grade. So if you're looking for an indicator of if is a student tracking in terms of their math learning as they proceed into high school and certainly up through 10th grade, we have limited information from a summative standpoint on a mandated state assessment. There's also implications for our high school accountability model. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, there is no growth. There's no ability to calculate growth that extends from the 8th grade through to 10th grade. So by having a test extend into 10th grade, we could do that for the first time, which would provide, we think, better information. In addition, if you look at our remediation rates, and Commissioner Lovers can point to this, it's highest in math. So I think we all agree that we need to think differently about what we are assessing and what is a graduate qualifying exam.
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what is a GQE. And to be honest, again, because a student takes the assessment at the end of the course, we have had 3rd graders take the Algebra 1 ECA. They're doctors now, but so we've had 5th graders take it, lots of 7th graders take the assessment. So it doesn't really seem to be aligned well with our 10th grade expectation in terms of having a graduation qualifying exam.
Teresa?
So could we assume then that whatever the 10th grade test is, it would be more rigorous than the test that is currently the ECA test? And of course, exam test right now.
I think the expectations, as we're talking to experts and talking within our own department in terms of experts, is really looking at what indicates that a student has qualified at the end of 10th grade. So yes, I think Algebra 1 is a gateway, but it doesn't seem to be the gate that we're looking for, because I think we're really looking at mathematics in terms of a domain and identifying really the knowledge, skills, and abilities that every student should have by that point in time, not course specific.
Okay.
Great, well that leads in nicely to this next set of our recommendation, is that we've talked about the 10th grade GQE, if we moved in this direction, being like qualifying for the Indy 500. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to win or don't crash along the way. So what are the other indicators that you need in 11th and 12th grade? And so the question that we're seeking to address here is what assessments should serve as measures of college and career readiness? And right now, students, we know, pursue different paths post-graduation from high school. And not every student will need or want to take the same CCR assessment. In addition, our current A through F school accountability system already includes college and career ready indicators, and that includes AP courses, IB courses, dual credit, and industry certification, and that feeds into the high school letter grade calculation. So our recommendation is for grades 11 and 12, that there would be different options available that align with individual students' interests and pathways. That is designed to provide additional information of readiness around these areas: college admission, college placement in a credit-bearing course, in other words, no need for remediation, workforce readiness, and military service. And we're also recommending that the A through F accountability system would utilize a participation rate calculation for students who participate in any one of these assessments, which would serve as an incentive for students to take one of these assessments. One question that we've acknowledged in working with Department of Workforce Development is we still have work to do on determining what would be a quality career indicator of workforce readiness. Any questions on that one?
What's the timeline on that, to develop it?
To develop the work readiness, the workplace, I don't have an answer to that. But if we were shifting to a new assessment system in 15-16, I think we'd want to have a clear idea going into that school year. Yeah.
Well, and let me say that the Indiana Career Council produced its strategic plan last week. The regional works councils that were authorized by statute more than a year ago are working in 11 different regions around the state. So when we talk about career and technical education, that's all a work in progress right now, and it'll be incorporated ultimately into thinking about assessments in 11 and 12. It'll be a part of our discussion going forward, but it's a very, very big piece about how we're rethinking the last 2 years of high school. Okay?
Great.
Other discussion on this point?
Question?
A question.
Sir, question, please.
Yes. I heard about the piloting for the iStar. What about the piloting for this assessment?
Yeah, I'm not calling it a pilot.
And which are you referring to the college and career ready indicators, or?
Yes.
Well, many of these already exist, and they've been field tested around the country. So, for example, the SAT and ACT, the AccuPlacer. So, apart from the workforce readiness assessment, which
I guess I'm really talking about the iStep.
This year's test.
Oh, I'm sorry, the iStep.
Yes.
So yes, and again, I will refer to Dr. Walker for the technical details, but we would have to field test item types next year for going into a 15-16 assessment. And because we are potentially shifting vendors, we may stay with CTV, we may not. We may stay with Questar, we may not. Part of what we will include in the RFP is interoperability. They have to make sure that there is continuity between the assessments over the years.
But are you referring to the piloting? There's been some discussion about this coming school year.
Right,
us
yes,
having a pilot.
yes,
I thought that's what I picked up.
Yes, yes.
And we're actually not calling it a pilot. You want to speak to that about this coming year's
Absolutely.
test, which obviously is being revised to reflect our new standards, but there'll be, what did we call it, an exposure, or I forget the exact technical
So in the
term.
fall, we'll actually have some opportunities for both educators and students to interact with items, both open-ended as well as
This
multiple
fall.
choice. And
This fall.
And then actually when we give the operational assessment in the spring, we will do what we did with IMAST, which is what some other states do, and that's where we have, actually the field test is built within our operational. And then when we set standards, it's on those items that actually have statistical reliability that we select for the form.
Okay, if that's not piloting, what are you calling it?
It's actually called an operationalized field test. That's the formal name of it.
Okay.
But it is where we actually pilot the items while
Okay.
we're giving the assessment.
Do you remember that, Vernon?
Well, I think, and I think this was a point, and Teresa made this point recently to me. I think that what you just called it a fancy term, we've called it an exposure. That the idea is that this is we don't want teachers or parents to have an idea that the test that is going to be fielded this fall is the test.
Right, we want to be really clear
that
about no
we'll be
states
ready
and-
with
yes,
with
right.
the revised ISTEP at the end of this coming school year, and then what we're talking about here ultimately is then the go forward with the new test.
Right.
But I want to make sure that's a very, very good point for you to raise and clarify. Wendy?
Clarity, for 11 and 12, then you're offering, there are options.
Yes.
Okay, and so students would have to, based on where they're heading, one of those tests. The other thing that I'd like to put on the table for further discussion later on is we almost need a campaign as we expand ISTEP and focus on 11 and 12 grade assessments. By the time kids get there, the first question they ask is, am I going to get credit for it?
Right.
Because if they don't see a title credit or a grade in a course or getting into a college, it's very difficult to get high school students and high school parents to accept, okay, here we go again with another layer. So I'm not opposed to it because I think we need to have something to assess. And I like the idea of having some continuity between third grade through 10th. But it's a PR nightmare when you have kids who do very, very well or kids who struggle, getting them to see that this is a good thing.
Yeah. And I will tell you, a lot of the discussion on the Indiana Career Council, Wendy, you'll be glad to know, is talking about if we're going to make a shift to elevate career and technical education in high school, is we want to educate the public about that as well, and about and explaining the new testing in 11th and 12th grade to be a big part of that, I think. Yeah,
Governor,
go.
forgive me for going back, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to process all this. So are there going to be 2 exams given this spring, or will it be 1?
No, you want to speak to that?
Sure, it would be just one. It has 2 parts, just like ISTEP, applied skills, and.
So this becomes a substitute test for what we had called I-STEP before, right?
It'll become our
So,
new I-STEP.
so once again, it goes back to my germane question about piloting, and you can call it field operational, whatever you want to, your terminology was. But there's going to be a new test that people are going to be held accountable for, which will affect A through F scoring of schools, as well as the evaluation of individual teachers to some degree.
Right.
So my question is, are we sure that we're measuring what we want to measure with this new test if you only have this operational field experience in the spring?
Well, let me speak to that if I can, instead of Dr. Walker. And I think you raise a very good point. It's been a focus of our attention for us, out of fairness to our schools, fairness to our teachers, because we're going to be in this interregnum period here as we talk about the new test that we're outlining as an assessment in this discussion. We really believe that we will be able, with the Department of Education, working with our vendors, we will be able to have a new test consistent with the requirements of the federal waiver on time for next year. We actually believe we'll be able to have that technical presentation this fall, so teachers, to Wendy's point, aren't going to be surprised by how this is coming together. The last thing, and probably most important thing that you raise, is that we also believe that we have the ability to build in the impact of a new test in terms of our overall accountability system. We do understand that there will be some movement in the overall performance by our students with a new exam, with new standards, but we believe that we can account for that. Doctor, you can probably explain how we do that a lot better than me, but I'm convinced that we will be able to utilize the exam at the end of this coming school year in an effective way, preserving accountability for our schools and our educators, while at the same time recognizing the overall. You want to speak to that for a second?
Sure. We've actually been involved in some pretty rich discussions with some third-party vendors that are assisting us. Dr. Damian Beta-Benner, some of you have met him, I believe, and also Dr. Derek Briggs, and we've been talking through what our options are in terms of accountability to make sure we use a very equitable and fair process with schools in the spring of 15. So we think we've come up with some really good ideas on how to do that and make sure that folks are comfortable.
May I just follow up with a question? My understanding when we're doing validity and reliability studies, that it's not one just administration of a test, and we're going to have one administration from your field, from your background and your experience. Is that wise?
So I think because reliability and validity actually can be measured with just one administration, as long as we're doing the work we need to do to lead up to that, especially with construct validity. Without kind of getting into the whole statistics discussion, what I would say is that the work that educators have actually been doing with us in the last month, and will continue to do all summer, will set the groundwork for that, where the educators are actually helping us understand what should these items look like, how do we think we should measure our new standards, and Indiana teachers are actually selecting the language of those items and so on, so that when we actually select the items later in August and build the forms, we have made sure that the construct validity is accurate and ready to go.
Yeah. Very good. You were nodding when I said this. I want to assure members that the Roundtable has no role in that, making that adjustment, but we believe the State Board of Education has the proper authority to accommodate the impact of a new test while preserving our accountability system, but in a fair and equitable way. We want to be fair to our teachers. We want to be fair to our schools. We want to acknowledge that a new test will have some impact in terms of overall performance. We believe State Board of Education has the authority to be able to accommodate for that while preserving our accountability system. We have 3 more slides to go. We have a resolution and an amendment, and I know the State Board of Education has a meeting coming up, just so people can be aware. Vince?
Yeah, just one last question. On number 10 on the resolution, it talks about the state giving due consideration to funding the following assessment cost, right? The full cost of at least one of the optional college and career readiness assessments administered in grade 11 and 12. So at this point, there's no funding available for those, and I presume. And then secondly, my question is, will the state fund one of those, or will the state provide funding for students to select one of those as an option?
That's my last slide. Would you mind holding that till we get there? Because we are going to address both of those.
Thank
Is that
you.
okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. We asked ourselves the question as a cross-agency group, could we absorb the IREAD 3 into the new 3rd grade ISTEP, or should it remain as a separate assessment? And after lots of conversation about this, the conclusion of Roundtable and State Board of Ed staff is that we need to maintain the IREAD as a separate assessment. Dr. Walker mentioned one of our third-party experts, Dr. Derek Briggs, an expert in accountability and assessments, who noted some of the considerations that if we did absorb the IREAD 3 into the 3rd grade ISTEP test, that would actually lengthen the duration of the test, and research shows that can lower the testing results. So there you'd have 2 accountability tests, one used for federal and state accountability, the other for 3rd grade determinant reading decisions, where you would have artificially lowered test scores. In addition, it is a different type of an instrument. So for many technical reasons that I won't go into here, and I'm happy to take questions on that, our recommendation is that is maintained as a separate assessment. However, we have had lots of conversation about wanting to make sure that we continue to measure reading, which is part of the ELA standards currently, and also with our new standards going forward. And if we have an assessment that extends now into 10th grade aligned with those standards, we would be testing reading and have a vertical scale for growth as well. So that is the recommendation there.
Yeah,
Do you want to add
Superintendent.
anything to the yes, that second point, ensure that new ISTEP assessment measures a sufficient number of reading items to provide valid and reliable proficiency and growth data. The accountability panel made a recommendation to the State Board of Education that we actually measure reading and language arts and math separately, so that we start to collect reading information separately on our assessments as part of our accountability. And so this piece that you see right here in the recommendation is really going to be spoken to later in my amendment, because this exact language is what I would like to see. In the resolution itself, it speaks to measuring language arts as we do now, and language arts as we do now does not give us a separate reading score. It is imperative to me that we don't spend millions of dollars on an assessment that cannot even give us a reading score of our students. Reading I consider to be the most important piece, an indicator of student success in school. This is worded very carefully here. We worked together to be sure that this was here. It's an important issue to me to be able to measure student reading separately on our ISTEP test. So we'll come back to that later, but I wanted to let you know this exact wording right here is part of my amendment.
That's fair. Thanks. Discussion on this point, and I'll reserve my comments on the IREAD 3 test for the amendment discussion. Bill?
I realize time is of the essence, and then as I look at what Dr. Bertram said about the recommendation, I see what item 10B, the recommendation being to pay for the cost, the state will pay for the cost of one of the assessments. Is there any consideration given, perhaps this exists already and I'm just not aware, or as you move forward, could consideration be given? What happens for a low-income student who isn't sure if they want to go to the 4-year option or the 1-year certification or whatever's developed in terms of workforce readiness, and they don't have the funds, and now are we backing that child into choosing the one free one when their decision might be based that they could take more than one? So is there any, just as we do with meals and some other things in schools, can you help me understand that recommendation, and is there any consideration for low-income students?
Sure, and I'll skip ahead to that one and then go back to the last slide. So one of the questions that we wanted to pose was what assessment should the state budget cover? Right now, the state pays in full for the mandated ISTEP and ECAs. It does also pay for the formative assessment aligned with the ISTEP, the acuity, pays for the iRead, as well as some diagnostics for iRead in K through 2, M-Class, PSAT in 10th grade, and then part of the cost of AP and IB. And anything else I'm missing, Michelle? No? Okay.
It doesn't pay for PSAT again for free reduced lunch in 11th grade?
No, however, I believe that working directly with vendors, school corporations can get discounts for certain students below income thresholds. So to your specific question, I think there is actually already a mechanism in place directly with vendors, but that's certainly something that we would explore as part of any final decision making.
So as of this recommendation, a local school district would need to work with a vendor for a lower income student to take a second exam not covered by state funding.
Is it through the vendor or through the department, Michelle?
It's through the vendor.
Mm-hmm.
Currently.
Yeah. And as you can see here, we are essentially recommending continued funding in a similar vein, aware, of course, of the implications on the state budget, that we would continue to fully fund any summative assessment required, that we would fund the cost of at least one optional CCR readiness assessment. Ideally, we'd fund more than that, but it is certainly at least one. And then fund the full cost of the required assessment used to determine remediation in 11th grade. Right now, that was 1005 enacted in 2013, in fact, as a result of a recommendation and resolution by the Roundtable in 2012. And one of the things that we found is because we don't have good indicators in 9th and 10th grade, that's requiring lots of schools to administer the AccuPlacer for lack of another indicator. So our hope is that by adding a 9th, 10th grade assessment, you would actually decrease the number of students needing remediation and therefore needing to take the AccuPlacer. But nonetheless, want to make sure that if you're requiring something in state statute versus being optional, that we give consideration to funding that in full. And then the last is that we would fund an optional formative assessment grades K through 10. I will just quickly note, the governor mentioned this in his opening remarks, that we also have looked into fixed form versus adaptive forms of the test. And our recommendation for a variety of federal accountability requirements, related reasons, as well as local implementation considerations, recommending maintaining the fixed form summative assessment. Although, in talking with third-party experts, are open to the idea of exploring if the technology becomes available and we can determine cost parameters are appropriate, et cetera, that we would explore perhaps moving to an adaptive form, which we are told is possible to do from a fixed form to adaptive, but not in the reverse. So that is our recommendation on the test form. And that concludes the slide.
Further question, discussion, we'll introduce the resolution and then discuss an amendment, but I want to open the floor up.
Very, very quick question. In item 9, it says that under Public Law 268/2013, students identified as at risk or in need of remediation are required to take the college and career readiness exam. What grade does that hit?
Right now, that's 11th grade.
That is the 11th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't the resolution state the obvious then? Because I've read this like 6 times trying to figure out what the trigger was.
What is the obvious, just so I'm clear?
So it is 11th grade, it's not?
Oh, I see. Well, actually, we're hopeful that might actually change with the addition of a 9th and 10th grade assessment. So that's why we didn't want to specify the grade.
So is it our job to specify that, or is that Dan and the state board to specify that? Because it seems to me schools would need to know, there's a part of me that says you don't wait till the 11th grade to ID somebody at risk of remediation. You can catch them at 8, catch them at 8.
It's state law, though.
Yeah.
What's the law?
State law is grade 11, that's why you can't change that.
That's that PL 268.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was part of HBA 1005, that's why it's not right.
yeah.
I'm a little confused on the required assessment list you have, and you mentioned up there that we require, well, the state pays for PSAT in the 10th grade. Does that mean that we won't have PSAT by the state for the students, funded by the state for the students, if we have a 10th grade ISTEP, or how will that change, or what would happen?
I don't think we know the answer to that yet. This is all going to unfold as we go through the RFP process and see what kind of responses we get from vendors. But certainly, by adding a 9th and 10th grade assessment, you have indicators you don't currently have of college readiness. That would perhaps say you don't need to have the state fund PSAT, but instead fund the SAT or the ACT or something else.
Okay. And then another question I have about this, exploring required assessments. Public law, I don't know which one it is, but we do require our students to be tested for high ability, and that's not on here. But if you do have an adaptive form of a test, could we use that for our measure of achievement in our high ability law? Just want to throw it out there, because I know you're trying to rein in some of this testing. Just think through, just thinking about that with the adaptive form.
Wendy?
A topic for another day as this is being developed is IREAD 3. I understand that it's a lot, and I understand why you have it, but I think we need to really talk about why third grade reading scores have increased, and I don't think it's all because of the test. I think we need to have some real philosophical conversations about what we were trying to get done, because in my district, the kids and the parents who panic the most are the ones that are going to pass it anyway. Just the idea of having that much testing, that much high stakes testing on third graders. I think we need to have some public conversation about the impact that's having. So if our intent is to make sure kids are reading by third grade, there's a lot we need to do kindergarten, pre-kindergarten through 2. But I know it's here. I just want to have that on the table for further discussion, because I don't think it's doing everything you think it is.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's one of the reasons why I'm very pleased that we were able to gain the funding for the first ever investment in quality pre-K. We'll be launching that pilot program, we believe, in early 2015. But as usual, you raise all the right fundamental questions, and I think it's a good discussion.
We have pre-K and we have full-day kindergarten for every student. And I think some of the work that we need to be doing in first and second grade, I just think that, I just don't want that topic dropped, because I know there's nothing I can do to get rid of IER 3, which is what I would love to do. But I think we need to have some conversations about philosophically what we're doing when retention, it says it's the last option, but I think it's just muddy out in the public what we're doing with IER 3 and what kind of pressure we're putting on third graders. So, enough said.
Any further discussion on any aspect of the resolution? Before we, what I'll do is I will move the resolution, ask for a second, and then we will, thank you, Bob. Seeing no further, I don't see any hands in the air. And then I'd like to recognize the superintendent for her amendment to the resolution that has been moved and seconded.
I have a very simple amendment, as you saw in the presentation on slide 21, about ensuring that we're going to actually measure reading within our ISTEP test. If you look at number 5 on page 2, the first sentence would stay as written. IREAD 3 will be maintained as a separate assessment in accordance with board regulations, so that would remain the same. But the second sentence, I would like to replace that second sentence with what you saw in the slide. Ensure that new ISTEP assessment measures a sufficient number of reading items to provide valid and reliable proficiency and growth data, so that we actually can have a score for reading within our ISTEP assessment. As this sentence is written here, this sentence is not in alignment with the presentation, and it says that the mandatory summative assessment should continue to measure reading items aligned with the ELA standards. That's what we do now. We actually measure standards, but we don't get a separate reading score. So I want to ensure that we have sufficient items and pieces in our ISTEP, which we're getting ready to make a new one, that is actually going to give us a reading score. I want to also say that, once again, the accountability panel recommended that we have 3 separate measures of, and I guess I need a second maybe before discussion, or you want me to do that? Okay. May I go ahead and speak now? So the accountability panel already indicated that we should have reading as a measure separate. I want to also say that probably the most important commission that I am on, next to the Career Council, is the Indiana Commission for the Improvement of Status of Children. And we are at 23% poverty of our children here in the state of Indiana. And with that comes a great deal of mobility. And if we don't find a way to measure reading and have it follow the child so that we can get a handle on children who are going to 2 to 3 schools a year, sometimes because of poverty, going from one apartment complex to the next apartment complex, we have to measure reading within the $1 million assessment that we give. It's very, very important that we make sure that that happens. Every assessment we give, every single assessment is first a test of reading. It's that simple, and it's that important. So I would move that we just simply amend to be in line with the presentation to ensure that the new ISTEP assessment measures sufficient number of reading items to provide valid and reliable proficiency and growth data, in addition to giving the IREAD 3.
I would, respecting the superintendent's sensibilities on this, I would rise to oppose the amendment. I think I've already spoken about how strongly I feel about IREAD 3. We've heard countervailing views around the roundtable, and I know it generates strong opinions, but I believe it has been a part of the progress that we are making in improved reading scores at the 3rd grade level. I think it's an important part of our strategy going forward, and I want to preserve this. Specifically, though, to this point, I think that making a significant change to testing in Indiana should include public input, discussion from parents, teachers. In other words, I think it's probably premature, with great respect to the superintendent and her intentions of this amendment. I think it's probably premature for the roundtable to make a commitment to make this significant a change without research, without exploring it with the public. I also believe it'd be a mistake to tie the hands of the State Board of Education before it can consider responses from vendors to the RFP and weigh considerations like the length of testing. We heard moments ago that the longer the test, the lower the performance. And to the extent that we do have a 3rd grade reading test now, I'd like to encourage opposition to the amendment so that we can simply move forward with the guidance that the State Board of Education is awaiting from the Education Roundtable to move forward with the request for proposals, and would urge opposition to the amendment. Glenda.
I guess I want to clarify in case somebody misunderstood. I am not asking to replace ISTEP reading measures
I think I said that.
with IREAD. So we would keep IREAD 3, and then we need to have some measure of reading following the child, not just at 3rd grade. We have to have reading measures in our ISTEP that give us reading scores. So I'm asking for more than one measure, not just 3rd grade. I want to have a measure of reading within ISTEP, get a separate reading score. We used to get that. We used to get separate reading scores. I was in the classroom, we used to get it. It was valuable information to know that your kids were on track with reading. We do not get that now, and I want to make sure that we do. I would urge support of my amendment. Thank you.
Right, and let me just say again, as I said before, I'm very clear that, as the superintendent said, sentence 5 remains consistent, that IREAD 3, we're not talking about an amendment to remove IREAD 3. But I still maintain that because we have IREAD 3, because IREAD 3 has been successful, is enormously important, that we ought to refrain from giving the State Board of Education guidance to fundamentally change our 3rd grade test and other tests to add a reading component, because we have 3rd grade IREAD.
No.
We're adding a reading. She's suggesting that it incorporate reading into the main test.
But reading's in the test. It's just it's high.
Yeah, Dan.
Governor, I agree with you on this. The State Board has a lot of meetings. We haven't talked about this. I would also like to see the assessment task force. I didn't hear this from them, but I need to see, maybe we could bring it to a meeting, discuss it, and bring some task force members there and see what they're looking at. If you add items, you could very well lengthen the test. And I just think that's something that takes a lot of discernment. I'd like to talk to some of the experts that we've consulted. We have a plate full. We're behind on about half of the items you're supposed to have for the waiver. So I wouldn't want to suddenly add this. I'm not uninterested or unwilling to look at it, but it's not for today. Please.
Superintendent
May I?
Ritz, 2 quick questions, if I may.
Please.
First question, maybe Governor Pence is more directed to you. I tend to support Superintendent Ritz's idea of some way of keeping this information so that pertinent people down the line will follow it. Is that something that could be adapted into iRead? And then my other question for you, Superintendent, is this something you intend only for 3rd grade, or would this become a component of all the I-STEPs as we go out?
It would be a component of I-STEP as presented in the presentation. It's the exact same wording as is in the presentation to ensure that we have testing items so that we can actually pull out a reading score.
But it would not be just for grade 3?
No, it would be all of the grades, which is so vital to be able to know students' reading abilities all the way through. It's the most important indicator of student success, and we just have to have that information regarding reading. It's when I'm asked what are the reading levels or abilities or what's the aggregate information of students in the state of Indiana regarding reading, I can give them no information except that I have a pass-fail reading iRead 3 test. I cannot tell any citizen in the state of Indiana the reading abilities of our students in Indiana because we do not collect that data. It's important. If we're going to spend millions of dollars giving an I-STEP test, we should be able to get a reading score. We used to get a reading score. We haven't for many, many years, and we need to have that valuable information. I'm not asking for iRead 3 to go away. That's not my decision. It's there. It tests something totally different. I want to know through the I-STEP information a reading score for children so that we can have that at our fingertips, the data follows the child, and we can bring it up.
A reading level score.
Yes.
A reading level score.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's
Yes.
fundamental.
Yeah.
Yes. Governor, I just want to support our superintendent in what I think is her goal and where she envisions we need to be going in this state. First of all, I want to agree with Wendy that it wasn't just a test that I think made a difference. I think we've got better instruction going on. But I want to also commend you for bringing out the need for spotlighting, pinpointing the necessity of children being able to read. We know there's a high correlation between students' ability to read and their performance in all the subject areas. So I applaud you for that. But I think that was the initial step. What our superintendent is trying to do is take us further on. I've come to find out, to believe rather, that what is inspected is what is going to be respected. You continue to inspect what our performance of our students are at the various levels, which is where I think our superintendent is trying to go. We are going to get greater performance on the part of those persons who we're holding accountable. I just think that it is this is a means to end. Testing is not an end in itself. Assessments are not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end.
Right.
And if we're trying to make our students prepared, then we need to continue to monitor the process. And my last comment is, and I don't know if it's germane to this body here, this is my first meeting, I know it's in your purview, in this body's purview. But when I look at the genesis of this whole process in this state, it was about identifying those students who needed additional assistance. It was about remediation. And now what we have is testing, and very little remediation and dollars going towards that. In this, it talks about funding for the assessment for remediation in 11th grade, but it doesn't say anything about funding, and well, as I say, it may not be the purview of this body. It may be another body's authority to provide those funding, maybe even the legislature. But the bottom line is I think we've forgotten that focus, and if indeed we continue to monitor the reading levels of our students, maybe we'll do a better job of remediating and meeting the needs, especially of those children of poverty and many minority students.
Well, and I would say, and Verna, thank you for the thoughtful comment. Let me be very clear on this. The superintendent and I are completely aligned on the importance of reading and assessing literacy across the state. Completely aligned in the goal. It'd be important to say, and I want to recognize Claire here for a clarifying comment. ISTEP currently tests reading standards. This will continue under the new test. Okay. The iRead 3 is exclusive to the 3rd grade. Introduced in 2011, we've seen reading scores going up. There's probably, as Wendy said, probably lots of different reasons for that, but it's all encouraging news. And I think there may be disagreement around the table. I think the iRead 3 test is an important element of Indiana's widening success in expanding literacy and reading in the early elementary years. And so but again, that's not being debated right now, whether we do it or don't do it. I want people to understand that the overall goal here of emphasizing the importance of reading and assessing literacy is shared. I just simply believe, and I would say with great respect, I think that, as Dan said, that introducing this element into the ISTEP exam at this point is premature without more public comment, more thought, and in as much as we have the iRead 3 in place today that is having a good effect, I would oppose the amendment. Claire, can you add anything in terms of a factual dimension, not advocacy?
Yes, thank you, Governor Pence. Just to clarify that this still allows room for the State Board of Ed to hear from vendors, because we don't want to close off the potential of adding additional reading items to the new ISTEP test. That would allow us to get better indicators, grades 3 through 10. But at this point, the advice that we have received, in the absence of receiving responses to an RFP that has yet to be issued, is that would actually extend testing for all of those grades, which would have cost implications, and it may not be something we want to do to have more time on instruction.
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. One, what prohibits the state board from going ahead and doing this without the resolution? Do they really need a resolution? This seems like, we're trying to write the RFP here.
What?
And if we are, and it has a fiscal cost, the statute's clear that we need a fiscal impact study, according to Senator Kennelly, and for this very reason, we don't get sort of surprises at the end that may add additional costs to the system. So it's more technical than anything.
I'll go ahead and make my comments regarding that. First of all, I have been concerned that we've brought this to the roundtable without a fiscal analysis. That being said, I also know that we're in a time crunch to get the RFP completed and done. This body does review the parameters of what that might look like and make recommendations to the State Board of Education. I'm not seeking anything other than I want the information to inform the RFP that we want to make sure that reading is going to be measured. That's my only point that I want. I actually am in agreement with every single thing that's actually on here, except that I want to make sure that reading is a separate measure. And so.
But the second question.
Can the state board go and do what they want to do? Can the state board go and do what they want to do after regarding this, Claire?
I'm sorry.
I believe the state board.
Could they do it without?
Could they do it without?
They could do correct. They don't
right.
have to listen to any of the recommendations, perhaps.
Yeah, they can reject them.
Well, much like with standards, you vote up and vote down.
What's disturbing to me is having to make a decision between the governor and the state superintendent of public instruction. And I absolutely think that is not something that we need to be doing at this point in time. The state of Indiana And parents, teachers are all looking for us to work together. And for us to be faced with a situation in which we have to take sides, I think is unforgivable and certainly no place for it at the Education Roundtable.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a way, and Claire, to your point earlier, I mean, I agree. I mean, reading obviously is a critical skill at all grade levels, and that's why we've identified that in the primary grades and have addressed the issue. Whether it continues at other grade levels is the question. Can an alternative be issued with the RFP in the specifications that would give us the kind of information that we want?
Yes.
Right, so it wouldn't necessarily have to be included in the resolution, but it could be issued as part of the RFP process to bring back that information to the state board, to the roundtable, to inform a decision. It seems like to me there are a number of questions that have been raised that we just don't have answers to.
That way we can speak with educators and others involved. I think that's where it belongs.
Further discussion? Teresa?
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't speak up on behalf of educators. I really, from what we hear.
Is that microphone on? I can't quite.
From what we hear from educators when IREAD 3 is happening, the data is not very useful. And I think if they heard that we were now once again embracing some sort of reading data to give them information that's helpful in terms of reading levels, I don't think they would be upset. I think they would be thrilled. They would be less stressed over what they're getting with the IREAD test. They're just not happy with the IREAD 3 exam at all. And so I would agree with Dr. Robinson I'm not so sure IREAD 3 is really the true catalyst for the improvement. But I think educators by and large would prefer to see something else be given to them that is more meaningful in terms of data.
Further discussion? Bob?
Thank you, Governor. My biggest concern with this point at this point in time, and it's something that I think everybody in this room recognizes, and that is if we're lengthening the test, we're not just lengthening in one grade, you're lengthening in 3 through 10, and I think that's a significant impact. If nothing else, I think everyone has heard that teachers don't like the length of the test, parents don't like the length of the test, and students don't like the length of the test. So if there's a probability that we're lengthening the test, and we don't know right now, I think it would be better for State Board and others that have more knowledge in this issue to deal with it, and that the RFP, RFI flesh that out. I don't think it's necessary for it to be made right now.
Superintendent.
Bob, you're absolutely correct. We can't sit here and talk about the length of test because it hasn't been made yet. It has been made, and we have the opportunity to make it. And we want to be sure that it's going to measure 3 things: reading, language arts, and math. And however that comes out, it comes out, but we got to have those 3 measures. To not have a reading score is, we just can't continue to try to improve our schools without reading information. It's just the most important indicator.
Further discussion? I don't see anyone waving a hand. In the interest of time, and I know the superintendent has a state board meeting coming up that's actually overdue, I would just, as we prepare to call the question on the amendment, I would just reiterate my appreciation for the sincerity of the amendment, but rise in opposition to it and suggest that it's both premature and that the current test reading standards, that we continue with the new test, and I believe that the amendment at this time should be opposed. With that, we will call the roll on the vote. Claire?
I want to make sure we know what we're voting on.
On the amendment.
It's on the amendment.
This is on the amendment, not on the base resolution.
My amendment.
Mr. Bertram?
I suggest we put the amendment in the RFP as an alternate. I vote no on the amendment.
Mr. Bland?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Representative Boehning?
No.
Mr. Breeden?
No.
Mr. Brinegar?
No.
Ms. Day?
Yes.
Mr. Dwyer?
No.
Mr. Elsner?
No.
Mr. Hubbard?
No.
Dr. Hughes?
No.
Mr. Kiley?
No.
Senator Cruz?
No.
Mr. Lechtenberg?
No.
Commissioner Lovers?
No.
President McRobbie?
No.
Ms. Meredith?
Yes.
Representative Smith?
Yes.
Superintendent Robinson?
Yes.
Senator Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Sanders?
No.
Mr. Shields?
No.
Mr. Stanzikevich?
No.
Mr. Tebby?
No.
Mr. Ward?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
I'm sorry, Superintendent Ritz?
Yes.
Governor Pence?
No.
Okay. Be safe.
Question, will the count?
With the amendment, I don't know if there's anybody who disagrees with wanting to know the reading scores of our kids as they progress forward. The opposition that I heard was mainly due to procedural reasons, timing reasons, financial reasons, length of test reasons. Would there be some consensus to Senator Rogers' point about, if we're picking sides between two people we have great respect for, that'd be the sense of this roundtable to just continue to look at this. What is the best way? Does it have to end today? Can this discussion through this roundtable continue? We're
Dan?
brought together as citizens to be advisors to our wonderful leaders. I hope it doesn't end today.
Bill,
There's
I
some
can
way
tell you
there's a
from the
sense of this
board's,
roundtable to bring people to us, do presentations. Maybe we can get there later in a different way to the superintendent's very passionate, well-stated interest in the reading scores. But I just hope this doesn't end it today. 'Cause I think
Dan,
the
quick
point is
comment?
well taken.
just, the state board is committed to that. Anything we can do within the right parameters to advance our knowledge of how reading is progressing with our students will get done. And we'll be glad to go back and forth with the roundtable on it.
With that, Claire will report the vote.
9 yeses, 18 nos.
And therefore, the amendment
And
is not carried.
correct.
I appreciate the sentiments and appreciate the statements made during the count very much. I know the superintendent does as well. We will now move to consideration of the resolution to adopt K-12 assessments that is before you, and Claire will call the roll.
Mr. Bertram?
Yes.
Mr. Bland?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Representative Manning?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
Mr. Brinegar?
Yes.
Ms. Day?
Yes.
Mr. Dwyer?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Mr. Hubbard?
Yes.
Dr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Kiley?
Aye.
Senator Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Lechtenberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Lubbers?
Yes.
President McRobbie?
Yes.
Ms. Meredith?
Yes.
Representative Smith?
Yes.
Superintendent Robinson?
Yes.
Senator Rogers? Mr. Sanders?
Yes.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Stanzikevich?
Yes.
Mr. Tebby?
Yes.
And Mr. Ward?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
No.
And Governor Pence?
Yes.
Motion carries.
The motion carries, the resolution is adopted. Roundtable staff will be in contact regarding our next scheduled meeting. And with that, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? Chair, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.